The charity concert at the Grand Steinway Hall was coming to an end, and people were slowly making their way to the elegant lobby during intermission. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the marble floors, and the sound of polite conversation filled the air. Women in expensive gowns and men in perfectly tailored suits mingled with champagne glasses in hand, discussing the evening's performance. In one corner of the lobby stood a magnificent black concert grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the golden light from above. Most people walked past it without a second glance, but one woman found herself drawn to it like a magnet. Elena Rodriguez stood quietly beside the piano, her simple black dress from a department store looking modest compared to the designer outfits around her. She had saved money for 3 months just to buy a ticket to this event. As an elementary school music teacher, attending such prestigious concerts was a rare treat she could barely afford. Her fingers gently traced the edge of the piano bench as she whispered to her friend Lucy, "Look at this beautiful instrument. You can almost hear the music waiting inside it." "I know what you mean," Lucy replied softly. "It's like it has stories to tell." Elena nodded, her eyes sparkling with genuine appreciation. She had always believed that pianos were more than just wooden boxes with keys. Each one had its own voice, its own personality. This particular piano seemed to hum with potential energy, ready to sing at the touch of the right hands. "The craftsmanship is incredible," Elena continued, admiring the smooth curves of the piano's body. "I bet it took months to build something this perfect." That's when a sharp laugh cut through their quiet conversation. Well, what do we have here?" Elena turned to see a tall, impeccably dressed man approaching with a small group of equally elegant people trailing behind him. His black tuxedo looked like it cost more than Elena made in a month, and his dark hair was styled to perfection. Everything about him screamed wealth and status. This was Sébastien Laurent, one of the most famous pianists in the world. His concerts sold out in minutes, and his recordings topped classical music charts across Europe and America. Tonight he had been the guest of honor at the charity event, playing a stunning performance that had earned him 3 standing ovations. "I couldn't help but overhear your little discussion," Sébastien said, his voice carrying a tone of amusement mixed with condescension. "Though I suppose someone like you wouldn't really understand what makes this piano so special." Elena felt her cheeks grow warm, but she kept her voice steady. "I was just appreciating the craftsmanship." Sebastian's eyebrows raised slightly, and his smile became even more patronizing. "Appreciating? My dear woman, this is a Steinway Model D Concert Grand. It takes years of proper training and education to truly understand an instrument of this caliber. It's not something you can appreciate from casual observation." The small crowd around Sebastian chuckled softly at his words. These were his usual companions, wealthy patrons of the arts who enjoyed feeling superior to others, almost as much as they enjoyed writing large checks to charity. Elena's friend Lucy shifted uncomfortably beside her, but Elena remained calm. "I've been playing piano for 32 years, she said quietly. This caused Sebastian to laugh out loud, a sound that was anything but pleasant. "Playing? Oh, my dear, I'm sure you have. Let me guess. Wedding receptions, birthday parties, perhaps the occasional church service?" His entourage laughed again, louder this time. Elena felt dozens of eyes turning toward their little group as other concert-goers began to notice the commotion. "Those hardly count as real piano playing," Sebastian continued, clearly enjoying himself. "Real piano playing requires dedication, proper instruction, years of study at the finest institutions. It requires understanding of music theory, technique, interpretation. It's not something you pick up as a hobby." Elena's hands clenched slightly at her sides, but her voice remained steady. "Music is music, regardless of where it's played." "Oh, how charming," Sebastian exclaimed, turning to his audience with theatrical delight. "How wonderfully naive. Tell me, where did you study? Juilliard? Curtis? The Royal Academy, perhaps?" When Elena didn't immediately answer, Sebastian's smile grew wider. "Local community college? Self-taught from YouTube videos?" The crowd around them had grown larger now. Some people looked uncomfortable with Sebastian's behavior, but others seemed entertained by what they saw as harmless fun at the expense of someone who clearly didn't belong in their social circle. Elena took a deep breath. She could feel Lucy's hand gently touching her arm, silently encouraging her to walk away. But something inside Elena refused to back down. She had spent her entire life being underestimated, being dismissed because she didn't have the right credentials or the right background. "I studied where I could," Elena said simply. "I learned from anyone willing to teach me." Sebastian clapped his hands together in mock delight. How inspiring. A real rags-to-riches story. Well, except for the riches part, of course. This drew more laughter from his supporters, but Elena noticed that some people in the crowd were beginning to look genuinely uncomfortable with Sebastian's cruelty. "You know what?" Sebastian said suddenly, as if struck by a brilliant idea. "Since you seem so confident in your abilities, why don't we settle this properly? A little demonstration, if you will." The lobby had grown quieter now, with more and more people stopping their conversations to listen to what was unfolding near the piano. "I challenge you to a musical duel," Sebastian announced dramatically. "Tomorrow evening, right here in this very hall. We'll both play and we'll let the audience decide who truly understands this magnificent instrument." A murmur ran through the crowd. This was unexpected, even for Sebastian, who was known for his arrogance but not usually for public confrontations. Elena felt her heart racing. Part of her wanted to refuse, to walk away with whatever dignity she had left. But another part of her, the part that had kept her going through years of struggle and hardship, refused to be intimidated. "What are the terms?" she asked, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. Sebastian's eyes gleamed with triumph. He had expected her to back down, to apologize and slink away. Her acceptance of his challenge was even better than he had hoped. "Simple," he said. "We each play one piece of our choosing. The audience will judge who plays with more skill, more understanding, more artistry. The winner—" He paused dramatically. "The winner will be recognized as the superior musician." Elena looked around at the faces surrounding her. Some showed pity, others curiosity, and a few showed what might have been hope. She thought about her students back at the elementary school, kids who came from families that could never afford piano lessons, but who lit up whenever she played for them during music class. "All right," Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent lobby. "Tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. Sebastian's smile was brilliant and cold. "Excellent. This should be quite entertaining." As the crowd began to disperse, people whispering excitedly about what they had just witnessed, Elena felt Lucy's hand slip into hers. "Are you sure about this?" Lucy whispered. Elena looked back at the piano one more time, its black surface gleaming under the chandeliers. Tomorrow night, that piano would tell everyone exactly what kind of musician she really was. "I'm sure," she said softly, though her heart was still pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. She had no idea that by tomorrow night everything would change, not just for her, but for Sebastian as well. The next morning, Elena woke up in her small apartment above Miller's music store feeling like she might throw up. The events from the night before felt like a dream, but the ticket stub on her nightstand proved it had all been real. She had actually agreed to face off against one of the world's most famous pianists. Her apartment was tiny but cozy, with sunlight streaming through old windows that needed new paint. The most prominent feature in her living room was an upright piano that had belonged to her grandmother. Its wooden case was scratched and worn, and several keys stuck if you didn't press them just right, but it had been Elena's faithful companion for over 20 years. She made her morning coffee with shaking hands, trying to process what she had gotten herself into. Her phone had been buzzing since 6 in the morning with messages from friends who had somehow already heard about the challenge. "Elena, are you crazy?" read one text from her colleague at the elementary school. "Do you know who Sebastian Laurent is? He's performed at Carnegie Hall." Another message was more supportive. "Girl, you've got this. Remember how you made the whole school cry during the Christmas concert? You have something special." Elena sat at her piano bench and opened the cover, her fingers automatically finding middle C. She closed her eyes and let the memories wash over her. 24 years ago, she had been accepted to the prestigious Berklee College of Music with a full scholarship. At 18, she had been considered a piano prodigy in her hometown. Her teachers said she had natural talent that couldn't be taught, and her future seemed bright and certain. But life had other plans. During her second year of college, Elena's mother was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease. At the same time, her father lost his job at the factory where he had worked for 15 years. Elena was the oldest of 4 children, and suddenly her family needed her more than her dreams did. She made the hardest decision of her life and dropped out of college to come home. While her classmates continued their studies and went on to professional careers, Elena took care of her mother and worked multiple jobs to help support her younger siblings. She gave piano lessons in the evenings and played at local events on weekends. But her dreams of becoming a concert pianist slowly faded away. Over the years, Elena had found a different kind of fulfillment. She became the music teacher at Lincoln Elementary School, where many of the children had never seen a piano before walking into her classroom. She watched their faces light up when they played their first simple melody, and she knew she was making a difference in their lives. But sometimes, late at night when she played alone in her apartment, Elena wondered what might have been. Across town in his luxury penthouse apartment, Sébastien Laurent was having a very different morning. He woke up in his king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets and immediately checked his phone for reviews of last night's performance. The reviews were good, as they always were. Technically flawless, wrote one critic. Precision and skill, beyond question, said another. But as Sébastien read through them, he noticed something that had been bothering him more and more lately. None of the reviews mentioned being moved by his music. They praised his technique, his speed, his accuracy, but no one talked about feeling anything when they heard him play. Sébastien pushed these thoughts away and got dressed in his designer workout clothes. His apartment was a showcase of his success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a concert grand piano that cost more than most people's cars, and walls covered with awards and photographs of himself with famous conductors and other classical music stars. He had been groomed for this life since he was 3 years old. His wealthy parents had hired the best teachers money could buy, and Sébastien had never disappointed them. He won every competition he entered, graduated from the finest music conservatory in the country, and quickly rose to international fame. But lately, Sébastien had been feeling empty. His performances felt mechanical, like he was going through the motions rather than creating something beautiful. He told himself it was just a phase, that all great artists went through periods of doubt. Last night's encounter with the school teacher had been a welcome distraction. Sébastien's manager had already called this morning, excited about the publicity the Duel would generate. Several local news stations wanted to cover the event, and tickets were selling fast. "This is brilliant," his manager had said. "David versus Goliath, except David doesn't stand a chance. It'll be great for your image. Generous master musician gives unknown amateur a moment in the spotlight." Sébastien chose to practice Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. His fingers moved across the keys with mechanical precision, hitting every note perfectly, but even he could hear that something was missing. Meanwhile, back in her apartment, Elena was struggling to choose what to play. She had originally thought about Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece she had loved since childhood. But then she remembered how Sébastien had dismissed her, how he had assumed she could only play simple wedding songs and children's melodies. Maybe she should show him that she could handle technical challenges too. She considered Bach's Goldberg Variations or Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata Third Movement. But as she played through various options, none of them felt right. Her phone rang, interrupting her practice. It was Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who lived in the building next door. Elena had been giving piano lessons to Mrs. Chen's 8-year-old granddaughter Amy for the past 2 years. "Elena, dear, Amy heard about your big performance tonight," Mrs. Chen said. She wanted me to tell you something. Elena could hear Amy's excited voice in the background, and then Mrs. Chen was translating. She says you always tell her that music isn't about playing the notes perfectly. It's about telling a story that makes people feel something. She says you should remember your own advice tonight. After hanging up, Elena sat quietly at her piano for a long moment. Amy was right. Elena had always taught her students that music was a language of emotions, not just a display of technical skill. When she played for her kids at school, she didn't worry about hitting every note perfectly. She focused on sharing something real and beautiful with them. That afternoon, Elena decided to visit the nursing home where her mother now lived. Elena's mother could no longer recognize her, but she still seemed to enjoy music. Elena often brought her small keyboard and played gentle melodies that sometimes brought a moment of peace to her mother's confused world. Today, as Elena played, a simple lullaby, her mother's eyes seemed to focus for just a moment. She smiled and hummed along with a few notes before drifting back into her own thoughts. She remembers the music, one of the nurses told Elena. Even when everything else is gone, the music stays with them. On the drive home, Elena finally knew what she would play that evening. Not because it was the most technically difficult piece she could manage, but because it was the piece that meant the most to her. It was the piece that told her story, a story of sacrifice, love, loss, and finding beauty in unexpected places. The sun began to set. Elena put on her best dress, the same simple black one from the night before, and prepared to face whatever awaited her at the concert hall. She had no idea that in a few hours, she would not only change her own life but also teach one of the world's most famous musicians what music really meant. Sebastian, meanwhile, was getting dressed in another expensive tuxedo, completely confident that this would be an easy victory. He had no way of knowing that he was about to learn the most important lesson of his entire career. By 5 o'clock that evening, the Steinway Concert Hall was buzzing with activity that no one had expected. What started as a simple challenge between two pianists had somehow turned into the most talked-about event in the city's music scene. Word had spread through social media like wildfire. Local news crews were setting up their cameras in the lobby, and reporters were interviewing people as they arrived. The story had captured everyone's imagination. The humble school teacher versus the world-famous concert pianist. Elena arrived at the hall 3 hours early, clutching a small bag that contained her sheet music and a thermos of tea that Lucy had insisted she bring for her nerves. The security guard recognized her from the night before and let her slip in through a side entrance to avoid the growing crowd of reporters outside. "You can use the green room to prepare," he told her kindly, "and don't worry about all that circus out there. Just focus on your music." But instead of going to the green room, Elena found herself drawn to the stage. The same beautiful Steinway piano sat under the bright stage lights, looking even more magnificent than it had the night before. The empty concert hall stretched out before her, with over 1,000 red velvet seats waiting to be filled. Elena walked slowly to the piano and sat on the bench. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the cover and touched the keys. The sound that came out was pure and rich, filling the empty space with warmth. "May I?" she asked the piano softly, as if it could hear her. It was something she had always done, treating instruments like old friends rather than just objects. She began to play scales, not to warm up her fingers, but to get to know this particular piano's personality. Every piano was different, she had learned over the years. Some were bright and cheerful, others deep and moody. This one felt dignified but kind, like a wise old grandfather who had stories to tell. For 20 minutes, Elena just played simple melodies, letting her fingers explore the piano's voice. She wasn't practicing for the duel. She was making friends with the instrument that would soon help her tell her story. Meanwhile, outside the hall, Sebastian was arriving in a black car with tinted windows. His manager walked beside him, talking rapidly into his phone about publicity opportunities and interview requests. 3 different record labels have called today, his manager was saying. They're all interested in recording this event, and the Metropolitan Opera wants to discuss a collaboration after they see how tonight goes. Sebastian nodded, but he wasn't really listening. Something about last night's encounter kept nagging at him. The way that woman, Elena, had spoken about music. There had been something in her voice, a kind of reverence that he couldn't quite understand. When he reached his dressing room, Sebastian was surprised to find flowers and good luck cards from other musicians in the classical world. Most of them seemed to be treating this as a fun publicity stunt, but a few of the notes made him uncomfortable. One card from an old friend read, "Remember why we started playing music in the first place." Another simply said, "Don't lose yourself in the performance." Sebastian pushed these thoughts away and began his warm-up routine. He had practiced the same technical exercises every day for 20 years, and they usually helped him feel confident and in control. But today, something felt different. As the hall began to fill with people, Elena was still on stage, now sitting quietly with her hands folded in her lap. The afternoon janitor, a man named Roberto who had worked at the hall for 30 years, approached her carefully. "Miss, I've heard every famous pianist in the world play on this stage," he said in accented English. "You want to know something? The ones who talk to the piano like you just did, they're always the ones who make people cry." Elena smiled at him gratefully. "Thank you. That means more to me than you know." By 6:30, the hall was nearly full. The audience was unlike anything the venue had ever seen. In the front section sat Sebastian's usual crowd, wealthy patrons of the arts in expensive clothes, classical music critics with notebooks, and industry professionals who rarely showed emotion during performances. But filling the back half of the hall was a completely different group. Elena's students and their families had somehow scraped together money for tickets. Teachers from her school sat next to mechanics and store clerks and nursing home workers. Many of them had never been inside a concert hall before. Lucy had organized Elena's supporters, and they had created handmade signs that read, "Music is for everyone and play from the heart." The contrast between the two halves of the audience was stark and obvious. In the front row sat Victoria Morrison, a retired music professor who had taught at the conservatory for 40 years. She had come because she was curious about the woman, brave enough to challenge Sébastien Laurent. Something about Elena's quiet dignity the night before had reminded her of the young students she used to teach, the ones who played with passion before the world taught them to be careful. As 7 o'clock approached, the energy in the hall was electric. Some people were there to see Sebastian easily defeat an amateur. Others were secretly hoping for an upset. But everyone could feel that something special was about to happen. Elena was back in the green room now, sitting in a folding chair and trying to calm her racing heart. She had changed into her simple black dress and braided her hair back the way she always did when she performed at school assemblies. Lucy knocked on the door and peeked in. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Elena admitted. "But also ready, I think. I keep thinking about my kids at school. They don't care if I play every note perfectly. They just want to feel something beautiful." "That's exactly right," Lucy said. "You're not trying to prove you're better than Sebastian. You're just sharing what music means to you." At that moment, Elena's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Amy, her 8-year-old student. "Mrs. Rodriguez, my whole family is watching on the news. Remember what you taught me. The piano wants to sing, so let it sing." In his much fancier dressing room down the hall, Sebastian was adjusting his bow tie in the mirror. He looked perfect, as always. His tuxedo was pressed, his hair was styled, and his hands were steady. But for some reason, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was preparing for something much more important than he had originally thought. His manager stuck his head in the door. "5 minutes, Sebastian. The hall is packed. This is going to be great for your career." But as Sebastian walked toward the stage entrance, he found himself thinking not about his career, but about something Elena had said the night before. Music is music, regardless of where it's played. For the first time in years, Sebastian felt nervous before a performance. Not because he was worried about making mistakes. He never made mistakes. He was nervous because something told him that tonight, technical perfection might not be enough. As the lights dimmed in the concert hall, and the audience settled into expectant silence, both musicians stood in the wings on opposite sides of the stage. Neither of them knew that in the next hour, Everything they thought they understood about music was about to change forever. The hallmaster walked onto the stage, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Over 1,000 people held their breath as he approached the microphone at center stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried clearly through the hall, "tonight we witness something truly unique. Two pianists, two very different backgrounds, one piano, and the universal language of music. Please welcome our first performer, Sébastien Laurent." The front half of the audience erupted in polite but enthusiastic applause. Sébastien walked onto the stage with the confident stride of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. His black tuxedo was perfect, his posture straight, and his smile practiced. He looked every inch the world-class performer he was. Sébastien sat at the piano bench and adjusted it slightly, just as he had done in concert halls across the globe. He placed his hands above the keys and paused for a moment, letting the anticipation build. Then, without warning, he launched into Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. The sound that filled the hall was immediate and overwhelming. Sébastien's fingers flew across the keys with incredible speed and precision. Every note was crystal clear, every passage executed with flawless technique. The difficult runs that would challenge most professional pianists seemed effortless under his hands. In the front rows, the classical music critics nodded approvingly. This was exactly what they expected from Sébastien Laurent. Technical perfection that few pianists in the world could match. His timing was impeccable, his dynamics precise, and his interpretation textbook perfect. But something strange was happening in the hall. While the front section watched with professional appreciation, the back half of the audience sat quietly, looking slightly confused. They could tell that what they were hearing was impressive, but it felt distant somehow, like watching a machine operate rather than experiencing music. Roberto, the janitor who had spoken to Elena earlier, sat in the back row with a ticket that Elena had somehow managed to get for him. He had heard thousands of performances in this hall, and he could tell that Sébastien was playing beautifully, but he found his mind wandering, thinking about his grocery list and whether he had remembered to lock his car. Sébastien continued through the piece, building to the dramatic climax with thunderous chords and cascading runs. The technical demands of the music would have defeated most pianists, but Sébastien made it look easy. His years of training and natural talent were on full display. When he finished, the hall erupted in applause. The front section gave him a standing ovation, and the critics were already making notes about his extraordinary technical mastery and flawless execution. Sébastien stood and bowed deeply, his smile confident and satisfied. But as the applause died down, Sébastien noticed something that bothered him. While the response was enthusiastic, it felt automatic somehow. People were clapping because they knew they were supposed to, not because they had been truly moved by what they heard. "Thank you," Sébastien said into the microphone. That was Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. He walked off the stage feeling oddly unsettled. The performance had been perfect, he knew that. He hadn't missed a single note or made any technical errors. So why did he feel like something was missing? The hallmaster returned to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our second performer, Elena Rodriguez." The back half of the audience exploded in cheers and applause. Elena's students jumped to their feet, holding up their handmade signs. Their excitement was infectious, and even some people in the front section found themselves smiling at the genuine enthusiasm. Elena walked onto the stage very differently than Sébastien had. She moved slowly, taking a moment to look out at the audience. When she saw her students and their families, her face lit up with a warm smile. She waved to them like she was greeting friends, not performing for strangers. At the piano, Elena sat down and placed her hands gently on her lap. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When she opened them, she looked directly at the piano, as if she was about to have a conversation with an old friend. "This is for everyone who believes that music belongs to all of us," she said softly into the microphone, "and for my mother who taught me that every song has a story to tell." Elena began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, but from the very first note something was different. Where Sebastian had attacked the piano with brilliant technique, Elena seemed to be coaxing the music out of the instrument like she was drawing out secrets. The melody flowed like a gentle river, each note connected to the next in a way that felt natural and inevitable. Elena's technique wasn't as flashy as Sebastian's, but it was solid and confident. More importantly, every note seemed to have meaning behind it. As she played, Elena's face showed the emotions she was feeling. Joy, sadness, hope, and longing all passed across her features like clouds moving across the sky. She wasn't just playing the notes that Chopin had written. She was telling a story about love and loss, about dreams deferred and beauty found in unexpected places. In the audience, something magical began to happen. Roberto found himself leaning forward, completely absorbed in the music. Tears started forming in his eyes as Elena's playing reminded him of his grandmother singing lullabies when he was a child. Victoria Morrison, the retired music professor in the front row, felt her breath catch in her throat. In 40 years of teaching, she had heard countless students play this same piece, but Elena was playing it like she had lived every note. Like the music was coming from her heart, rather than just her fingers. Even in the front section, the sophisticated audience members were beginning to shift in their seats. This wasn't the kind of performance they were used to. It wasn't about showing off technical skills or impressing critics. It was about sharing something real and honest and deeply human. Elena moved through the piece with growing confidence, her playing becoming more expressive with each phrase. She added small touches that weren't in the original score. A slight pause here, a gentle emphasis there. That made the music uniquely hers. When she reached the most emotional section of the piece, Elena's playing became so tender and heartfelt that several people in the audience began to cry openly. Lucy, sitting in the middle section, had tears streaming down her cheeks. Amy, Elena's 8-year-old student, was gripping her grandmother's hand tightly, completely mesmerized. But the most surprising reaction was happening backstage. Sebastian stood in the wings, listening to Elena's performance, and felt something crack open inside his chest. This was what had been missing from his own playing, this connection between the music and the human heart. Elena was playing with technical skill that was solid, if not spectacular, but more importantly, she was playing with a soul that Sebastian realized he had lost somewhere along the way. Every note she played seemed to come from a place of genuine emotion and experience. As Elena built toward the final section of the Nocturne, the entire hall had fallen under her spell. The division between the wealthy patrons and the working-class families had disappeared. Everyone was just human beings experiencing something beautiful together. When Elena played the final gentle notes of the piece, the hall fell into complete silence. For several long moments, no one moved or spoke. The music seemed to hang in, the air like a blessing, touching everyone who heard it. Then, slowly, the applause began. The applause started slowly, like gentle rain beginning to fall. Then it grew stronger and stronger until it filled every corner of the concert hall. People weren't just clapping, they were on their feet, some crying, some laughing, all of them moved by something they couldn't quite put into words. Elena sat at the piano bench, looking slightly overwhelmed by the response. She had played from her heart, just like she always did with her students, but she hadn't expected this kind of reaction from a concert hall audience. But something unexpected happened next. Elena placed her hands back on the piano keys. "If I may," she said into the microphone, her voice barely audible over the continuing applause, "I'd like to play one more piece, something I've never performed for anyone before." The hall gradually quieted as people realized she wasn't finished. Elena looked out at the audience, her eyes finding her students in the back rows, then moving across to the well-dressed critics in front, and finally settling on the piano itself. "Music isn't about proving you're better than someone else," she said softly. "It's about sharing a piece of your soul with others. This next piece is about finding beauty in ordinary moments, about the strength that comes from love and sacrifice, and about believing that everyone deserves to experience something beautiful." What Elena played next wasn't a famous classical. piece that would impress critics or show off her technical skills. Instead, she began an improvisation, something that came purely from her heart and her years of experience. She started with a simple melody, something that sounded like a lullaby her grandmother might have sung. Then she began to weave in other themes: the sound of children laughing during recess, the gentle rhythm of her mother's breathing during those long nights in the nursing home, the hope in her students' eyes when they played their first song. This was music that couldn't be found in any textbook or learned at any conservatory. It was the sound of a life lived with purpose and love, even when things didn't go according to plan. In the audience, people found themselves thinking about their own lives. Roberto remembered dancing with his wife in their tiny kitchen 40 years ago. Victoria Morrison thought about the students she had taught over the years and wondered if she had encouraged them to play with their hearts or just their hands. Even the sophisticated audience members in the front rows found themselves deeply moved. One wealthy patron, who had come expecting to be entertained by watching an amateur fail, discovered tears running down his cheeks as Elena's music reminded him of the mother he had lost the year before. But the most profound reaction was happening backstage. Sebastian stood frozen in the wings, listening to music unlike anything he had ever heard. This wasn't about technique or training or even talent in the traditional sense. This was about truth. For the first time in his adult life, Sebastian understood the difference between playing music and making music. He had spent years perfecting his ability to reproduce the notes that great composers had written, but Elena was actually creating something new and beautiful in real time. As Elena's improvisation reached its peak, building layers of melody and harmony that somehow told the story of every person in that hall, Sebastian felt something break open inside him. All the emptiness he had been feeling, all the mechanical performances and hollow praise. Suddenly he understood what had been missing. Elena brought her improvisation to a gentle close with the same simple melody she had started with, like a story returning home. When the last note faded away, the hall fell into the deepest silence anyone could remember. Then something unprecedented happened. Sebastian walked onto the stage. Elena looked up in surprise as the world-famous pianist approached the piano. The audience held its breath, not sure what was happening. Sebastian stopped in front of Elena and did something that shocked everyone in the hall. He began to applaud. Not the polite, measured applause of a professional acknowledging another professional, but the heartfelt clapping of someone who had just witnessed something extraordinary. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sebastian said, taking the microphone with shaking hands, "I came here tonight thinking I was going to demonstrate technical superiority. Instead, I've been reminded of something I had forgotten." The hall was so quiet that every word carried clearly to the back rows. "Elena Rodriguez has just shown all of us what music is really about," Sebastian continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I have spent my entire career learning to play the piano perfectly. But tonight I learned the difference between playing perfectly and playing truthfully." He turned to Elena, who was still sitting at the piano bench, looking stunned. "You have reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place," Sebastian said. "It was never about being better than anyone else. It was about sharing something beautiful with the world." Sebastian sat down on the piano bench next to Elena. "May I?" he asked quietly. Elena nodded, moving over to make room for him. What happened next was something no one in the hall would ever forget. Sebastian began to play the same Rachmaninoff piece he had performed earlier, but this time, it was completely different. Instead of focusing on technical perfection, he played with the emotion and vulnerability that Elena had shown him was possible. Elena joined in, adding a gentle harmony that supported Sebastian's melody without competing with it. Two pianists, four hands, one piano, creating something together that neither could have achieved alone. The music that filled the hall was a conversation between two different approaches to the same art form. Sebastian's trained precision blended with Elena's natural expressiveness, creating something new and wonderful. As they played together, the artificial division in the audience disappeared completely. Front row and back row, wealthy and working class, trained critics and elementary school children, Everyone was united by the beauty of what they were hearing. When the music ended, the standing ovation lasted for nearly 10 minutes. But more importantly, something had changed in both pianists. Sebastian turned to Elena as the applause continued around them. "Thank you," he said simply. "You've given me back something I didn't even know I had lost." Elena smiled at him. "Music belongs to everyone," she said. "It always has." 3 months later, Sebastian Laurent announced that he would be taking a year off from touring to study with a very special teacher, Elena Rodriguez. The headlines called it the most surprising career move in classical music history. Elena, meanwhile, found herself with more opportunities than she had ever imagined. Several recording companies approached her, but she turned them all down. Instead, she used the attention to start a music program for underprivileged children, with Sebastian quietly providing the funding. The Steinway Concert Hall now hosts a monthly series called Music for Everyone, where professional musicians perform alongside students and amateur players. The concerts are always sold out, and they've become known for the joy and authenticity that fills the hall during every performance. Roberto, the janitor, was right about pianists who talk to their instruments. Elena had done more than just talk to the piano that night. She had reminded everyone in the hall, including herself, that music at its best is a conversation between hearts. And sometimes, if you listen carefully during those monthly concerts, you can still hear the echo of that magical night when two very different musicians discovered that the most beautiful music happens when technique serves the heart, not the other way around.